Right, we come on to the final sort of area. Okay, and I'm going to go through it. If you want to make any extra notes on top of what you've already done, that is absolutely fine. But this was one area that sort of come through quite a bit in terms of lacking sort of understanding. Right. To start with, if I just change it back to, I'll change it to blue. Right. There's two bits here, collectively. You've got the oxygen deficit and you've got Epoc. Okay. Now, we'll come to that in a minute. What I want you to look at first of all is this. Now, if you follow the line of resting oxygen consumption, it's a very, very similar shape to heart rate response to exercise. Okay. So it's very, very similar. Okay. Now, what the oxygen deficit is this. If you actually look at the black line, okay, that is what actual oxygen consumption is, okay? And what oxygen deficit is that at the start of exercise, there is insufficient oxygen being taken in to work aerobically as soon as you start exercising, okay? If you were able to work aerobically as soon as you started exercising, that is what, in fact, I'll just change my colour to black so it just makes it a bit clearer on here. So if you were able to work aerobically as soon as you start exercising, your actual oxygen consumption would be that. So you can see that this blue bit here, I'll just sort of line it what I'm talking about here. That is the oxygen deficit. There's insufficient oxygen being supplied at the start of exercise to be working aerobically. Okay, but once you reach the plateau here, you are now working aerobically. So that's what the oxygen deficit is. Hopefully that makes a bit more sense. So I'm just going to clear the pen marking. Right, with Epoc, Epoc stands for excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. Ultimately, Epoc is this. It's recovery. So once you've finished exercise, it's the recovery process. That's essentially what Epoc is. Now, Epoc, as you can see there, is split into two components. So you've got the alactacid component and you've got the lactacid component. Now, they're the two scientific names for them. You can refer to them as something else. So I've just abandoned the pen. I'm just using this little implement from the pen now and use my fingers. Hopefully it should work. Now, the alactacid component is also called the fast component. Okay, and you can see in comparison with the red element of Epoc and the yellow, it does take less time to recover. So that's why it's called the fast component. And the alactacid component is also known as the slow component. It's the longer part of recovery. Okay, so that's what you've got to refer to Epoc as. So Epoc as a collective is excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. That's what Epoc stands for. There's two components. You've got the alactacid or fast component of recovery, and you've also got the lactacid or slow component of recovery. Right. The things to look out for here, if I just clear the pen markings. Right. For me, there are three things to know for each component of Epoc. Okay. The first thing to remember is what's the main role or roles of each component. Okay. What's the main role? What's the main function of each component? The second key element is how long, what is the duration in terms of time for each component. Now obviously what I'd be looking for there is a time answer. Now obviously with the fast alactacid being the fast component, clearly it's going to take less time for the roles of the alactacid component to happen than the lactic acid component, with that being the slow component. And then sort of the third and final element to know is this. Is how much oxygen is needed. And what I'd be looking for here is an answer in litres. Okay, so as a sort of a little revision tip, when trying to learn Epoc, there's a few stages really. First thing is, can you remember what it stands for? 2 is remembering that there were 2 components, A lactic acid, fast component, lactic acid slow component, and then my 3 elements there at the top. What's the role or function of each component of the recovery process? How long does each component take, and how much oxygen is required for each component? Okay, and then what I'll go through here is, again, it's just the same information that I mentioned in the lesson previously. So if we look at the oxygen deficit, the key thing for me is the bit that's highlighted in red. So when you first start exercising, not enough oxygen is present to be working aerobically, so therefore you are working anaerobically at the start. Okay, that's all you really need to know about oxygen deficit. Okay, if we then look at the lactic acid component, if I just bring the pen option back on, remembering my 1, 2, 3, 1 for function or role, 2 time or duration, 3 how much oxygen, and I'm going to number them here. So the fast component, the first one is the function, or one of the functions, and actually there are 2 key functions or roles of this component. It involves the resynthesis of PC and ATP, and also the resaturation of oxygen. It's trying to get more oxygen into your muscles to break down lactic acid, but that takes much longer, which is why the slow component. But also, the more oxygen you get in, you can help resynthesize ATP and your phosphocreatine stores. Now, with duration, so if we put this as my number 2, the next bullet point, you'll see that it takes 3 minutes for full restoration of PC, and that again links to one of the drawbacks of the ATP-PC system. If you're trying to fully replenish and resynthesize your PC stores, it takes 3 minutes, which is quite a while, particularly if you're working at a high intensity. And then the other element, if I just change the colour, so even though it takes 3 minutes for full restoration of PC, you can actually resynthesize 50% of your PC stores in 30 seconds. And that's where, if you're looking at, if you do weight training while your sort of recovery in between sets, for example, is crucial that you acknowledge. And then if I just go back to my red, oh, don't want to stop recording, sorry about that. And if I change to my red, you've then got my third bit there, which is the last bullet point, and it requires 2 to 4 litres of oxygen. So there you've got the first 2 bullet points are the roles and function. The second bullet point is time frame, duration, and then the final bullet point is the amount of oxygen in litres, and it's anywhere between 2 to 4 litres. And then with the slow component, again, if I go back to my numbers, so the main number 1, the top one, the main function of this component of recovery is to remove lactic acid. And obviously you can see from the next bullet point, that's to do with duration. It takes up to an hour for full removal of lactic acid. That's why it's the slow component. So where full resynthesis of PC takes 3 minutes, the removal of lactic acid takes much longer. Okay, and then you can see the final sort of blue bullet point there is the amount of oxygen, and it requires more oxygen. Now, there was a couple of questions regarding these bits here. All you're required to know for this course is how lactic acid can be removed or broken down. That is it. You don't need to worry too much about the Cori cycle. That's just the process of basically reconverting lactic acid back into glucose. And obviously, if you're converting it back into glucose, you can then break it down and help to resynthesize more energy and help remove lactic acid. Okay, so you can see there, the majority of lactic acid is actually converted back into pyruvic acid. And the reason why comes back to the oxygen. Remember, we talked about, if we look at pyruvic acid, well, in the aerobic system, pyruvic acid is broken down further in Krebs cycle because there's oxygen present. Obviously, if there is no oxygen present or limited oxygen availability, then lactic acid will start to accumulate. So if you're getting more oxygen in your lungs during recovery, you're able to reconvert that lactic acid into pyruvic acid, and therefore can break down in the Krebs cycle, and you're resynthesizing more energy. Okay, hopefully that helps a little bit with Epoc. So what I would like you to do, and this was a question that you answered before, but I just want you to have another go at answering it. Okay, so you don't have to draw the figure out. You can if you want. You don't have to. But the question I want you to have a go at answering is this one. Okay, so identify and explain what is happening at A and at B in figure 1. So before you answer it, I'll give you some hints. You will get a mark for saying what A is called. You'll get a mark for saying what B is called, and the other 2 marks on offer is actually explaining what's happening at A and B. So write out the question at the bottom, have a go at answer, and pause the video now. So hopefully you've had a go at the question, and this is the mark scheme. So you can see you get a mark for saying that A, oh sorry, I'll just go back. Sorry, I just need to get my pen on. So you can see that point A for a mark is the oxygen deficit, point B together is Epoc, so you get a mark for just saying what they are. And you can see, if you look at knowledge point B, the deficit is where there's not enough oxygen present at the start of exercise to be resynthesizing and working aerobically from the start. So there's your 2 marks for oxygen deficit. And if you look at F and G down here, you've got the fast component, or A-lactic acid, det and component the same thing. And then here, in brackets, you've got the main function of each. So the fast component of recovery is the resynthesis of ATP or PC and resaturation of oxygen with myoglobin. And obviously with the slow component, it's the removal of lactic acid. So hopefully that sort of helps a little bit with Epoc.